Now we are going to look at how we can work with dynamic configuration files with the help of templates. We will also discuss how we can use handlers and the notify sections within Ansible playbooks. Here we are, back in our Ansible playbook, which we have been working with in the recent demo sessions. We have already used it to deploy Apache Web Server, and the last task we added to it was to stop the Apache server after installation. Next, we will add a task which copies over a dynamic configuration file. Let's understand what it means. Like most web applications, our tiny little application may need some configuration files which need to be pushed from the configuration server to the target web server. Like in most real-world scenarios, this configuration file may not be a static file. We may need to replace certain settings in the configuration file before we copy it over to the target server. This could be anything from a database connection string, to source code versioning, to remote API path, and so on. So this makes our configuration a dynamic configuration file. Okay, now let's see how we can accomplish this goal by dynamically modifying our configuration file before copying it over to the remote Apache web server host. First, we will add a new task. We will name it Copy Template File, because our configuration file will be sort of a template file. And for this purpose, we will use a module appropriately called the Template module. What this module does is to take a Ginger file, replace the variables within the Ginger file, and copy the modified version of the file to the destination server. Ginger is a template engine for the Python programming language. It is similar to the Django template engine, but provides Python-like expressions. Let's configure this task now. The name of the module is Template. It will need the source template, and we will specify the source as src equals current.html. One thing to remember here is, for the template module, we have to use Ginger files. So we must specify an extension of .j2 here for our template file. The J2 is the typical file extension for Ginger template files. So our source file needs to be called current.html.j2. Now let's specify the destination as dest equals /var/www/html. So based on this task, we will copy our current.html Ginger file, pre-process it to replace the required configuration values in it, and then paste the modified version of the file into /var/www/html on the remote host. In our current demo, we are not making any real configuration changes, but the template module does provide us the ability to make far-reaching configuration changes. For instance, using this module, we can even modify the Apache configuration file httpd.conf. Say if you want to change the port number on which the Apache web server listens, or you may intend to make any other change in the Apache configuration file. You can use this template module for that purpose. The right way to go about this change will be to make a backup of the current config file, and then place the template tokens in the file where we want to make the changes. Then at runtime, the template module converts the template file to the target config file and copy it over to the target server. But that is a different use case. For the sake of this current demo, we are just going to copy our current.html file to the destination directory. So now our task is configured. Let's save this playbook and quit our text editor. Before we move on, we need to create our current.html template file. Let's use VI Editor to create our file. Execute vi current.html.j2. So this is our Ginger template file. Let's add some content here. This is my current file. My host name is. At this point, we will add a variable here. So as we mentioned earlier, we can use a set of double curly brackets to specify a variable. Let's call our variable Ansible underscore hostname. Ansible underscore hostname is actually a standard Ansible fact, and its value equals the discovered hostname of the target server. Alright, so this is our current Ginger template file. The difference between a copy and a template module is that a copy will copy the entire file. It will not interpret or pre-process the file in any way. But when we use template module to copy the file, it will read all the variable names inside the file content and replace them with the actual variable values. This allows for very flexible configuration systems. Using these templates, we can push out consistent configuration across a cluster of thousands of nodes. And say if a handful of servers in our cluster need some host-specific configuration, we can even produce that host-specific configuration file with ease, no matter how large our target host group is. Now let's save our current file and exit the editor. Now let's get back into our playbook and update it. vi apache underscore install.yaml. First, let's specify the complete path for our target file. dest equals /var/www/html/current.html, so that we do not copy over the file as a Ginger file, but instead as a plain HTML file. Now here, let's use another construct, which is called notify. As we discussed earlier, this notify construct will raise an event when the task is played, and based on the status of this task, the notifier will notify. And who will it notify? You are right, the handlers. Let's wire all this up now. Let's create a notify directive and call it start Apache. Now to handle this notification, we need handlers. We will create new handlers section. Let's configure our first handler. We will need to name it exactly the same as the notification which will be fired above. So we will name it Start Apache. For the actual module command for this handler, we will use the service module and specify the necessary arguments. Name equals Apache2. State equals stopped. So now we can see clearly how this is wired up. Our copy template file task will notify this handler, and this handler will take the necessary action of stopping the Apache service. The advantages of using notifications and handlers are flexibility and code reuse. For instance, in this playbook, we may encounter many places where we need to stop or start the Apache server. So rather than configuring these service module commands all over the place, we can define these handlers in one place and notify these handlers from multiple places within our Ansible playbook. It makes the playbook really modular and easy to read and understand.